Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. How are you this fine day?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. How are you this fine day?
I'm doing all right. I was thinking of a fun opening zinger and it's gone.
You know, sometimes we have good opening banter, good opening zingers, but I'll be honest with you, listener. Sometimes we don't, and that's fine.
I mean, sometimes we have good episodes, and sometimes we don't.
That's true. We've had over like 165 episodes. If we have a couple in there with some crappy zingers, that's, low percentage. Like, I'd go to say majority of them have good zingers.
I'm going to say a majority of them don't. Right.
Wow.
I'm going to say out of 165 episodes, I hope one of them is good.
Doug, I know you're listening. Tell us which ones have the best zingers. I need a top 10 list.
You don't know how a producer works.
No.
Because if we ask Doug for a top 10 list, we will be writing the top 10 list.
No, I mean, he needs to just send us the top 10 zingers just for reference. We're not going to do an episode on our top 10 zingers.
No. A producer will just tell us to do it.
Anyway, Seth, tell me about the game that you've been enraptured by these last few days that has drawn you into the video world, as we would call it.
I haven't really been enraptured by it, and I was actually relatively disappointed by the game that I was recently been playing. I was playing Adventures of Mighty Max, which for the SNES, developed by Ocean Software and released in 1994. It was also released for the Sega Genesis. I was playing the SNES version. I wanted to play it because I really like the Mighty Max aesthetic. And if you're unaware of what Mighty Max is, it is a plastic toy that was originally released in Europe, and we got some version of it in the United States. They were like little play sets that you could have in your palm of your hand, and they would come with like a little plastic, it almost was like a little makeup thing that you would open up. It was a little plastic, but it was all plastic and maybe looked like a snake or like a skull. And inside it, there was like a tiny little play set for tiny little figures. And they were great. And I really like their aesthetic. I think they look awesome. Then there was a cartoon called The Adventures of Mighty Max. That was also on television in both the UK and in the US. Then they made The Adventures of Mighty Max, based on the television show, based on the toy.
Based on the book.
No book. No.
Oh, Mighty Max was kind of like people call it like the male version of Polly Pocket.
Yeah, exactly. I loved it. I had a couple of sets. I was really into them. I feel like, though, since they originally launched in the UK, like we were behind it. And by the time that I was able to actually get sets, it was like going out of popularity. But I really liked the Mighty Max aesthetic. Never played the game, so I decided to check it out. And that was a mistake. I know this isn't like a retro rewind. I say it's not like a retro rewind because I don't feel like I was playing Mighty Max because Zach was punishing me, but he could have. The controls for the game were just really off. And the worst thing about the game was whenever you jumped with your character, you would jump unrealistically high. So like this is a platformer, so I'm expecting the character to be able to jump maybe their height or double their height or maybe triple their height. Mighty Max jumps 10 times their height and in like a very quick, speedy jump, which is not usable for the platforming. It's just rough to play it. And you're supposed to like move things around and solve puzzles while you're timed doing so. And I couldn't just get past the controls. It was killer. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm jumping so high. It's one of those instances where maybe I should have read the manual, but the controls were just really, really off. Ultimately, I was stoked to play some game based on the Mighty Max franchise, and I was let down. So I would not recommend checking out Adventures of Mighty Max unless you want to be frustrated with being able to jump 1 million miles in the air.
Fair enough.
So Zach, what have you recently been playing?
Well, Seth, because of the recently launched HBO original series, The Last of Us, I have been playing The Last of Us Part 2, which was the sequel developed by Naughty Dog and released in 2020 for the PlayStation 4 and PS5. I've been playing the PS4 version because I do not have a PS5. The game is a continuation of The Last of Us. It's set 5 years after the first game and deals with the characters of Ellie, Joel, and some new characters such as a character named Dina and a character named Jesse. The primary story is about Ellie going on kind of a quest to get revenge on a group of individuals called the Washington Liberation Front, who are located out of Seattle. Without going into too many details, because it gets pretty major spoilery pretty quickly, I will say that the game is very good. It's also very depressing. So if you are not quite into incredibly heavy, very personal stuff, you might want to maybe sit The Last of Us as a series out. However, if you are comfortable with content that can be heavy in terms of some of the themes that it deals with, such as loss and dealing with loss, and you're comfortable with that and you think that you can get some enjoyment out of a game that deals with those subjects, check out Last of Us and check out Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us is one of my favorite video games of all time, and Last of Us Part 2 is quickly gaining up there as being one of the best video games I've ever played. I will say that it has some really neat elements of it that are different from the first game, in that the second game has not only some new infected that you get to deal with, which is always fun, but also the exploration has been toned up a bit. It's a bit different, where in the first game, I feel the game was very linear. So it feels like you can explore, but you really can't. Pretty much everywhere you go in the first game, you go for a reason. So you might be able to like enter a room differently, or enter a different room, or there's like a hidden room in the area. But for the most part, if you're in an area in the game, you're supposed to be there for the plot. In The Last of Us Part 2, there are literally buildings that you can enter that have nothing to do with the story, but they have their own story built into them, which I think is really neat. Without going into spoilers, there was this one moment where I broke into a window and climbed into a building, and I found all these notes from these people who were on the run from this Washington Liberation Front, the WLF, also called the Wolves. These people were on the run from the Wolves, and then you find a dead body, and it's assumed to be one of those people. And then you find a workbench, and as you start working at the workbench, someone grabs you, and you have to fight them off. And then you end up fighting these like 4 people who are in the room with you, and it turns out those are the people that were running away from the Wolves. And you wouldn't know who they were unless you picked up like a piece of note that was in a different room that I just happened to break into by chance, which other games do that, right? That's not a unique thing to games. I think some Bethesda games even have some of that kind of side quest element to them, but this, it just feels differently because it feels a bit less forced upon you. I didn't stumble upon this quest because I talked to some guy and he told me, I'll put a marker on your map if you want to go check this out at your own leisure. I literally stumbled upon it because I broke a window into a building and climbed in. I feel like it has a bit more of a realism to it in the sense that there are side quests, but you unearth the side quest at your own pace, and they're not really just kind of there for you. They're part of the world, and they're for you to find. And I think that's kind of a cool way to do exploration in video games, and it's one of the reasons why I'm really enjoying the game. I will say the game is very creepy, and it also kind of puts me on edge while I'm playing it, so I can only really play it for a few like bursts at a time until I need to like decompress and do something a little less stressful. But that's The Last of Us Part 2. It is currently available for the PS4 and PS5, and yeah, check it out.
Fun stuff. Anyway, in today's episode, we're going to talk about more fun stuff. We're going to talk about a company that was involved in developing a few edutainment titles for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. In fact, maybe a company that we've already talked about before and said we were going to do an episode on them, and here is that episode. Video games and educational materials have gone hand in hand for many years. Beyond your usual flair of arcade games, many early computers and early game systems have games that provided some form of educational content. And here's why. Because people were still trying to figure out what video games could do. And people also wanted to sell video games. And they also realized that people generally, in the beginning, viewed computers as a work thing or a like a learning tool. So how do you sell video games? You make them a learning tool, and then you put them on the work thing, and then parents buy the video games. And that's why edutainment kind of blended through, because it was a convenient way to sell things. Now, edutainment content came in a lot of different forms. Could come in a form like Oregon Trail, which taught people how to leave your friends behind when they break their ankles or get dysentery. Also, Oregon Trail taught you if you were a banker and you bought lots of cows, you really didn't need to worry about stopping anywhere. Just let the cows die as you keep going.
Yeah, surprisingly, if you have a lot of money in that game, you do really well.
That's actually not surprising.
No,
That's
I
just
know.
life.
That was called sarcasm.
Oh, yes. If you have money in life or Oregon Trail, you'll do fine. Or a game like Donkey Kong Jr. Math, which was Donkey Kong Jr. with math, because that's how you sell something twice. By the 1990s, video games were starting to become a bit edgier. Mortal Kombat, Doom, Night Trap were all games that were causing a stir with their popularity and with their each respective controversy. It was around this time that Nintendo started to put out edutainment titles for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System because they didn't want to get caught in the crosshairs. They would be like, look at those edgy Mortal Kombat games. We're over here with Mario Paint. So don't worry about us. So while Sega was being brought before Congress, Nintendo was making a shift away from violence and began to release titles that were more in line with what some may call edutainment.
Now, as we've likely referred to before, edutainment is a portmanteau, one of my favorite words, of the word education and entertainment.
Yes.
And is often used to describe games or media that is designed to be both educational and entertaining.
Some may even describe our podcast as edutainment.
We often do.
Or also a farce.
Yeah, or a farce. Or just, two brothers who don't really know anything.
Right. We come off pedantic, which is like education, and we fight with each other, which is entertainment.
That's true. Now, a game like Oregon Trail or Math Blaster would fall under edutainment, as those games are arguably fun and arguably educational. However, something like Encarta would not be an edutainment game because it's literally an encyclopedia that has a weird jester in it. So it might be fun because there's a weird jester in it, but Encarta is definitively not a video game. Now, some of the games that Nintendo released during this time included something like Fun and Games, which was kind of an activities suite of different things that you can do, developed by Trade West. Mario is Missing and Mario's Time Machine, two Mario-themed games that were published by Software Toolworks, where you learned about geography and history, respectively. And there was also a series of Mario early years games. These catered to a preschool audience and taught them things like numbers, letters, and various other lessons that might be relevant as children are getting into the age where they start going to school. There was also, of course, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, which were so impactful that we did a whole episode on those games. And of course, lastly, we couldn't forget the games that were released by Raya Systems. Now, Raya Systems originally was founded in 1988 by Steve Brown, a media tech entrepreneur, per his own LinkedIn. Also on his LinkedIn, he described kind of the nature of the founding of the company, which was that it was one of the first digital therapeutics companies, and they had hoped to find new ways to address major healthcare issues. And one of these ways was to publish video games that were health-related.
Now, Raya Systems published 4 video games: Packy and Marlin, Bronchi the Bronchosaurus, Rex Ronin, Experimental Surgeon, and Captain Novolin. Some of these you may recognize as games that Zach decided to stick me with my Retro Rewind.
I've only stuck you with 2 of them. You were the one that gave me Rex Ronin.
Yes, and one of these games was the game that I would give back as a revenge. Each game touched upon a specific health topic. Packy and Marlin and Captain Novolin dealt with diabetes. Bronchi the Bronchosaurus was about asthma. And Rex Ronin, Experimental Surgeon, was about the dangers of smoking. We've already touched upon a few of these games in our Retro Rewind in the past episodes, and we will be talking about one of them later in this episode. But to let people know who haven't listened to those episodes, Captain Novolin, in the game, you play as a superhero with diabetes. Captain Novolin must stop the evil alien Blubberman and rescue the mayor, and you have to monitor your blood glucose levels while doing so. It is a side-scrolling platform. That's bad. The sprite is too large, and your character doesn't jump high enough. It's bad. Packy and Marlin, in this game you have 2 diabetic elephants, and you must remind them to eat healthy and take their medication. At the end of the game, you have to face bosses who try to force you to eat sugary junk food, just like in America. And it's a platformer where you play as the elephants. Now, Rex Ronin, Experimental Surgeon, deals with a surgeon who goes deep inside the body of a lifelong smoker to fight cancers and robots. It is also a platformer, and you can listen to Zach's critique of it in last episodes. It's real bad.
I think it's worse than Captain Novolin because I've played Captain Novolin.
I was gonna say I don't know if it's worse than Captain Novolin, but I haven't played it, and I played Captain Novolin, so I'm biased towards Captain Novolin being pretty bad. But if Zach's played both,
pretty sure it's worse than Captain Novolin for my opinion.
And then there's Bronchi the Bronchosaurus, which is another platformer. So they've made all platformers, really. Well, they published all platformers, and it's about a dinosaur who has asthma. We'll talk about it later, as it was my Retro Rewind, but I have a surprise for you about that game, and we'll get there. And now, each of these games are a bit different in terms of how they play, and how they were, they didn't all have the same graphics. They had varying different graphics. The sprites were all different sizes, and I believe they were all done by different actual developers, which is why some of them were good and some of them were not good.
Yeah, so Packy and Marlin was developed by WaveQuest, and I think also Bronchi was developed by WaveQuest, and then Rex Ronin and Captain Novolin were developed by Sculptured Software. So I guess WaveQuest was talented.
WaveQuest knew what they were doing. Sculpture Software, not so much. But they were all platformers, and they all had different messages. Well, I mean, except for Packy and Marlin and Captain Novelin kind of had the same message. But they presented the message in different formats.
Now, Packy and Marlin was actually kind of an interesting and fairly important game for the history of therapeutic video games and health gaming, which in the 90s was something that was brand new, so it wasn't like massive industry. Packy and Marlin was part of a 6-month study in 1997 on behalf of Click Health by researchers at Stanford University's medical school. In the study, they looked at 59 diabetic children, ages 8 to 16, and found that after playing the game, the children were 4 times less likely to require urgent care visits than children who played other games. Another study, which was conducted over 3 months, found that kids who played the game decreased their diabetic-related emergency room visits by 77%, which those are pretty good stats. I will say, as someone who had a psych minor and took a very long course on research psychology, 59 children is not a very big sample size, but still pretty decent, especially over the course of like a 6-month period. I feel like that's a decent chunk of data you can look at and make some inferences over, but it'd be kind of interesting to see it kind of on a larger scale what something like Packy and Marlin could have done. While doing some research on Raya Systems, I will be honest, it was kind of hard to find a lot of detail about their company. Mostly is not as plentiful or available as one might have hoped. But I did find a series of small business loan requests that were filed on behalf of Raya Systems and archived on the U.S. Small Business Administration website. Raya Systems actually put in a handful of these, not just for the 4 games, but there was other projects they were working on at the time that they would file for loan requests and grant requests and such. One of these was an abstract I found for a game that I can kind of infer to be Rex Ronin, as it was about smoking and dealing with smoking in your teens. There was also another one that was about managing unmanaged diabetes. And I think it's really interesting that these abstracts, they don't focus on the game in their abstracts. They are focused solely on the theme. So, like, the abstract for Rex Ronin starts off with stats about teenage smoking. It leads into how, children can get into smoking very easily through media and advertising. And then it goes into the details about how, in the example for Rex Ronin, quote, an estimated 40 million U.S. households have a Nintendo system. And I think it's kind of interesting to see just how Raya was trying to craft this message, in that they knew once they could get this video game out there, it would hit a large audience. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily sell 40 million copies, but it would hit a large audience by being available. And I think that's what was likely one of the reasons they were able to get these games out the door. They were awarded all of the funding that I saw. So it was pretty good to see. And I think Raya was really just focused on health. And I think that was kind of what makes them a unique company, especially to talk about on a video game podcast. You know, they weren't a company that started off to revolutionize the game industry or by some guy who had a feud with another person and started their own game company sort of deal. This was someone who legitimately wanted to make a difference in the world and wanted to focus on health and educational material for children. And, even if the games kind of suck, I think that's a admirable thing to have. Raya Systems would eventually change their name to Health Hero Network, and it looks like the company is still around in some capacity, though I don't think they're building video games and such anymore. They were, according to the website Crunchbase, acquired by the global tech firm Bosch in 2008. So they are a subsidiary of Bosch at this point, but around in some capacity.
Some Bosch also make like dishwashers.
Bosch makes everything. They're just a massive tech firm.
I think part of the reason why maybe the games were not necessarily the best type of games, at least some of them weren't, was maybe because it was a nonprofit, people writing grants for a number that they thought was possibly the number that they needed, and then it ended up not being enough money kind of thing.
Right, yeah. I assumed the way these games would work without sitting in the chair at Raya Systems is they would come up with the abstract, they would submit for the grant or the loan, get the grant or the loan, and then commission the developer to make the game. And
right.
They would be like, here's $50,000 that we got from the government. Please make a game.
And the developer was like, that's not enough money.
Right.
But we'll do something for you to get that $50,000. And then Raya Systems was like, all right, we'll publish this. And that's going to be our Raya System episode. It's going to be short. It's like a classic gaming blurbs.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with these games, they kind of have a bad rep Captain Novolin and Rex Ronin are particularly negative games. I think they score like 1 stars in.
They're not good games.
Meanwhile, Packy Marlin and Bronchi the Bronchosaurus, which Seth will talk about, have a bit more of a positive legacy to them, especially with Packy Marlin and being involved in the studies that it was part of. And it was also a game that was tested through a hospital system, Kaiser Hospitals at the time, which, I think they might have had a bit more ambition with those games. And maybe Captain Novolin and Rex Ronin, without knowing, might have been kind of we got to do 2 more games sort of deal.
Yeah, we can get into our retro rewind, and I'll just continue to talk about Raya Systems games. So I had Bronchi the Bronchosaurus as assigned by Zach from last episode, and I enjoyed this game more than Mighty Max, which was the game that I volunteered myself to play. Bronchi the Bronchosaurus was developed by WaveQuest and was published by Raya Systems. The game has you play as a dinosaur who has asthma and is armed with a feather duster. And you have to jump around the level, avoiding hazards like smoke and pollen, and to avoid lowering your breath ability, your lung capacity, as it were. Because you have abilities to jump, hit things with your feather duster, and you also have the ability to make a puff of air. But you have to collect lungs. So the more lungs that you collect, the more puffs of air that you can make. But if you hit an obstacle, your lung capacity decreases and your puffs of air become smaller, which is like what happens with asthma. I mean, beyond puffs of air, I don't think like Zach's going around blowing on people. You also have to answer questions about living with asthma throughout the game. At the beginning of the level, it does give you the answers, so you don't have to think too hard about the questions that they ask you. But if you're a child, you may not be retaining what's on the loading screen, and it may be difficult for you to answer. It is a mascot platformer, but probably the best mascot platformer that I've played by Raya Systems. The only game that I haven't played by them is Packy and Marlin and Rex Ronin, but I don't think I need to play Rex Ronin to know that it's bad. And honestly, if I had asthma in 1995 and when the game came out and I was a young child with it, I think it would have been a pretty cool game. I think that it would have helped me understand different things that were going on with asthma with me having asthma in a clear way, because it talks about peak capacity and why you need to use your inhaler, when you need to use your inhaler, if you're starting to have a fit, what you should do, how do you use your inhaler, which I think would all be very helpful information to somebody who's maybe 10 years old and has asthma and doesn't really necessarily understand it. I am really bad with understanding, though, what age children comprehend things at nowadays. So if I say 10, you're no, a 10-year-old would understand it. I don't know, maybe 6, 10, or 12. I don't know what the age is, but whatever age is you're a kid and a video game can explain something to you better than real life can, then that's the age that I mean. And I actually really liked it. So when I say I really liked it, I mean that I've played much worse games than it, and I think that it holds up as an educational game. Should you run out immediately and check it out? No. But if you want a fun romp and an edutainment type style of game, or you want to check out a Raya Systems game, this one's pretty good compared to the other edutainment games that they published, and is actually a fun platformer. I don't have anything really negative to say about it, except that maybe the boss fights are a little obtuse, and the music's all right, but after hearing it after a while, it's a little annoying, but it changes at least. You start out in the city and you have 2 levels, and then you have to go to the boss fight, and then you have then you go to a lake or something, the outdoors. Next week, Zach, we're gonna get away from Raya Systems actually, and you can play Pajama Sam. No need to hide when it's dark outside.
All right, cool. Seth had me play Olympic Summer Games for the Super Nintendo. This was a sports game for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and it was released in 1996 and developed by Tier Text Design Studios, and I hate it. I hate it so much. In the game, you have different events that you must compete in, such as pole vault, high jump, 100-meter sprint, and skeet shooting. The first one is a 100-meter sprint, and I couldn't get past it because I didn't quite know what to do, because the game doesn't tell you what to do.
Did you read the manual?
I could have read the manual, but here's the thing. In pretty much every other sports game I've ever played on either the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, it at least tells you what buttons to press. This game does not tell you anything. That's not my only problem. My other problem is just it's an atrocious looking game. It has terrible music. The music sounds like someone just discovered a keyboard for the first time and just starts banging on it. And that's the music the whole time. It's just not good. Yeah, it's just a bad game. I didn't like it.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not really sorry.
That's okay. Seth, next week you can play Doom Troopers for the Super Nintendo. I think Doom Troopers is actually part of the Mutant Chronicles franchise / Doom Troopers collectible card game.
Cool. I'm looking forward to playing Doom Troopers.
Play the Super Nintendo version because apparently the second version's bad. Well, thank you for joining us for another classic episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. We love doing these episodes, and if you loved this episode on Raya Systems, let us know. If you have a favorite Raya Systems game out of the 4 of them, let us know. If you were part of that Packy and Marlin study, let us know. I'd be curious. But in any case, you can email classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can also email us via our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. If you use the contact form, that sends us an email. You can also listen to our podcast on the website, and you can, of course, listen to our podcast where all podcasts can be found. Stitcher, Podbean, iHeartRadio, CastBox, whatever. We're there. You can also follow us, like us, tweet at us, do all those things because we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and Twitter. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch are Classic Gaming Brothers. Twitter, CG Brothers Pod. And with that, that's all I have to say. Seth, is there anything you want to contribute to this conversation?
Don't play games like my brother.
And do not play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I have been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. Oh, we should have mentioned that we're going to be at PAX. Oh, well, too late.